we-
9.
9.
Yep, you're fine.
Okay. Do we know if David's in town?
I think I expect he's gonna be there. But okay, so we're expecting David, and who else are we missing now? We're missing
Rico and
Rico.
Lindsay.
and Lindsay.
Where,
Okay.
Lindsay?
Okay. Well, I will, since it is 6:31, I will call the meeting to order. And the first item of business is a public comments section. It doesn't appear to exclusively.
You've got
Well,
one member of the public.
Yeah. Does anybody have interest in speaking? There's David.
Thank you.
Okay. Hearing none. The next item is our norms. And actually, I kind of like to, you want to, Dick, you want to do
Well,
you're good.
the vice chair is,
I know, but he just,
I'd be happy to leave them.
if we give him a minute, we can do that.
well,
Hang on,
Okay.
let's see.
excessively long.
Yes.
Okay, review the norms. We will start and end on time. We will be prepared for agenda items. The agenda will prioritize the most important issues. We will have time limits on agenda items. All members will have an opportunity to speak if they so choose. We will listen to who is speaking and focus on the issue at hand. We will not micromanage the superintendent.
Thank you, David.
For the business,
Or,
or the special ed department.
well, they don't report to us anyway, they
All
report
right.
to the superintendent. Just wanted to touch base, since we do have an executive session tonight, we're expected at the end of the meeting. The plan is sort of to probably, finish up our other bits of business here and then reconvene down in the,
Not if we have,
Yeah, we will, if
You're gonna
everyone's
stay
here,
here?
we'll probably stay here because Gina's
Okay.
not here, so it's much easier to transition. We'll just stay here.
okay, so we can say, good, never mind, okay. Next item is the consent agenda,
I move.
I'll move the consent agenda.
okay? Well, Julie got you there, your second?
Second,
Okay, so Julie and Dick,
well,
or Dick and Julie, or whatever.
No,
it's Julie.
Julie was first.
I'm making her first.
Julie and
Yeah.
Dick, yep. Okay,
Maybe I'll get
all in
cookies.
favor of approving the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the last meeting and hiring, please raise your hand or make a noise or do something. There's Lindsay too, all right.
Aye.
Okay, that, any nays? Dean, are you a voter there?
He said yes.
You said yes, good.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having trouble with my camera at the moment. I'm trying
Not
to
a
get it to
problem.
work.
Okay, so that's unanimous. And now we're into the big item of the night, which is, what?
Can I, since we haven't reviewed the special ed budget, but we did review the general budget, shouldn't we review the special ed budget first and then possibly act on the whole thing?
Well, we're being asked to act on the entire thing, on both budgets, just because that, the timing gets difficult. The BRSU budgets feed into each of our district budgets. And since they do that, it's a little tough for those budgets to feel like they're real before having the BRSU numbers be in there. So we're always, since our BRSU budget is not subject to approval by the voters, except to the extent that it's included within Taconic, Green Meadow, and Winhall budget. So we generally are kind of under pressure to be the first guys to approve.
I agree, but since we have not even seen the special ed budget, we've seen the general budget.
Okay, we could do it in either order.
You're the chair.
I'm happy to accommodate requests there, so Why don't we start with the special ed budget, Doug?
Certainly. All right, so I'm going to packet page 21, packet page 21. I'm sure everybody got a chance to look at the write-up. I gave you all 3 years in one. So starting with year end, we did have a higher than anticipated surplus. And again, second year or third year actually in a row now, that is due to additional extraordinary reimbursement, the majority of that additional anticipated surplus. So we're still in a really good place with respect to how much we have in the bank to use for next year and future years. So this year we are anticipating a surplus. One of the main reasons for a surplus right now for this year is because we haven't been able to fill all of our positions. As you saw, we have a lot of open positions and we don't believe we're going to be able to fill the majority of them. So rather than roll all of those funds into yet increased surplus for this year over what we already have, we're suggesting that we return some of that to the districts right now. And out at the districts, we are recommending, for example, we were talking about earlier, Jim, at T&G, where we're recommending the use of that surplus to give back to the voters for this year, for next year's taxes, towards next year's tax rate, that this would assist that, right? It would make your surplus even higher. In Meadowy's case, where we're seeing a small deficit, this might help to offset some of that deficit. So the idea is to return these funds now in this year. We would return them based on the way they were raised this year, the same percentage basis, the way we normally give back a surplus, but not wait to give it back as part of the assessment, just give it back right now. So that's part of what I want you to consider when you're thinking about approving the budget.
So that's on page 25.
Let's see, so line 36.
Yeah, I want to make sure everyone understands that.
Yep, package page
Because this is
25.
not something we typically do.
Right.
So if you have any questions or want us to restate that, please let us know.
Yeah, because we've been able to, with the surplus, reduce assessments by 600,000 per year, and keeping it flat for this year keeps us from having a
Yes.
blip
And
up.
we are still doing that even with this return.
Yep.
And even with the return of this $400,000 to the districts, the use of $600,000 towards next year's assessments, we still anticipate having $600,000 of a surplus, which can hopefully then, if all things were equal and we were able to fill all of our positions and actually hit what we budgeted, I would recommend that we gradually lower that use of assessment, right? Like maybe next year 400, the year after 200. But we could be in the same place where costs tend to go up in the special ed budget as we move through the year, as students are identified, as we understand more about the service needs, which also can lend itself to those extraordinary students having higher costs, meaning increased reimbursement. What we put in the budget right now is a snapshot in time of what we know today. And we, from experience, we know that that changes as we move through a year.
And also just to kind of clarify so we end up looking at, in the special ed budget, assessments increasing by 3.7%, but that does not reflect the additional return of surplus.
Right.
So return of surplus would be on top of that, which would actually mean we have a decline.
Right.
With special ed's charging.
I think we need to explore just a little bit the fact that we can't hire, probably because they're not available to work in Maine or New Hampshire or upstate New York or here. But that group is our group that has the most hands-on needs associated with their efforts to overcome whatever the difficulties that they're encountering are. Is it a salary issue? Is it a housing issue? Is it they're not producing enough special ed teachers across New England? And
So-
are we and then the follow-up to that is, are we underserving those kids? I know we've got spectacular programs, the Anchor program and the others that are making great headway, but not everybody's in Anchor.
So, so for those folks online, I don't know if you can see Caitlin on screen. If you could come in a little or go, you can go next to David or Dick too, but Caitlin Cavagino's here. She's our Director of Special Education. So I will leave it to you, Caitlin, to respond to Dick's question and share with the board sort of where things currently are.
Yeah, so I think the answer to your question is multifaceted. I don't actually think that it's a salary or benefit related deficit. I think we're very competitive when we look regionally at our neighbors. Housing certainly is an issue that's not drawing necessarily new people to our area, particularly young graduates of education programs. I do think there's a barrier of entry there. I'm not going to say that we're underserving. I think what we're doing is asking our current case managers and teachers and related service providers to do more than we have had to historically to meet the needs of greater caseloads. We're also looking at trying to increase enrollment in some of the specialized programs that we were talking about, such as Anchor and Rise, or some of our other functional life skills-based programming that we're developing within our schools. We are trying to capture students with similar profiles to each other in programs like that so we can serve them more efficiently as opposed to being as disparate as we have been historically when we have those needs in a lot of different pockets of places.
It also seems, you guys have been creative with filling positions, and I was kind of pleased to see that, like UVM with the kids with hearing issues, they couldn't fill a position, but you guys found a way to cover that locally.
Yeah, we're trying to be
Looking at the
flexible and
Rise,
creative,
we're actually
yeah.
expanding this year.
The intention, yeah, is to be able to support more students within that.
Wow.
No, it's the emergency management.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the intent.
Okay, no excuses.
The intention is that we're looking at expanding staffing and Rise to increase, obviously, the number of students we'd be serving within our current elementary Rise classroom, but also extend that into intermediate and middle level support for students with a profile similar to that of our younger Rise students, but for whom are ready to be in a more inclusive setting. At MEMS, most likely, is the location where we're looking at kind of building and expanding that upper level programming for those students.
That's what I was just saying. I know we're having trouble finding, it seems like we have, to some extent, this problem finding the same people year after year, though. That certain, some specialties more difficult to find than others, is that?
I think that we're having a hard time finding and securing special education staff, and that's national. It's throughout the state. I think that from my conversations with Caitlin and principals, it's tough. Like, not having these positions filled is difficult, and Caitlin's working with folks to be as creative as possible and as comprehensive in programming as possible. But I think that while we talk about our own students, at the secondary level, it's even more complicated right now. And I think it's important, to sort of talk about that, because I think that strain is important for the board to understand. Not having a high school, not operating a high school is challenging for us. And I would like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest strains we have right now at that level is, you referenced Anchor and the really exceptional work that's happening there to support students with complex social and behavioral profiles, right? Students who need embedded therapeutic supports to be able to be regulated enough to learn in an educational setting. Without an operational high school, we don't provide any local programming through BRSU that serves high school age students with a similar profile to that. We do have some great local independent programs. However, because this need has risen over the last few years, and we've actually had a couple local programs close, our current partners in that work are at capacity with pretty lengthy wait lists, which means we have multiple high school students right now with a need for a therapeutic classroom placement, is what we would call it, and there is no placement for them. So that leaves them in a really challenging position. That leaves us as the LEA for them responsible for trying to provide online tutoring, trying to contract with service providers who might be able to meet them in community settings to provide direct support, things of this nature. But it's a very fractured program that they're receiving, and we know one not designed to meet students with their type of need. And that number continues to increase, unfortunately, monthly. And there's really very little that's in our locus of control to impact or create additional placements.
At what point are we gonna have to tuition these kids elsewhere and pay that increased cost?
I mean, that's what we're looking at. The challenge, though, is that we're in that moment, but regionally, these are students who are not necessarily needing like a full-time residential placement. These are students who could go, to and from this placement on a daily basis. However, there's none within a reasonable driving distance from our communities. So we're sort of stuck, not sort of stuck, we are very stuck in that position right now. So we're actually considering, providing a higher level of care for some of these students outside of our geographic region, just to get them an appropriate educational placement.
And just, I raised with this board, the discussion of BOCES. There's legislation, I asked you to read that and said I'd be revisiting that with you. From my perspective, one of the priorities for our supervisory union from the BOCES is a regional therapeutic day program that would essentially service students in Bennington and Rutland County. And I would like that to start at the high school. So, when you think, I'm dropping that in because I want you to understand what that model, what types of services could potentially be served by the legislation allowing for this cooperative. And my priority would be therapeutic day programming specifically for high school kids, potentially extending down to middle level. So I'm just going to put that in there. We have some pretty frustrated, and understandably so, frustrated parents right now because there are no options, right? And these are families whose, we're trying, the work that Caitlin and other LEA reps have been doing with local high schools and whether that's independent or public, to try to get them to be willing to take some of our kids. It's pretty extensive and pretty exhaustive. So we feel really stuck. These are the moments where school choice does not work in our favor. And so I'm just sort of putting that out there.
How are others, like Mount Anthony and Arlington and all, are they just having the same problem?
I would say the same problem exists in all of our neighboring districts. Honestly, even north of us, there are reduced therapeutic placements available, and also with a moratorium on additional independent school approvals, there isn't really a pathway for schools who serve this need to new schools to sort of crop up, as it were. One thing that I think some of our regional neighbors are doing that's a bit different than us is having a more robust tutorial program in-house, which means that some of them are hiring full-time special educators or related service providers who are not attached to a building, who work out of somewhere like central office. And as we end up with numbers of students without placements, they come in, for a couple hours a day and receive direct instruction from a teacher to meet our tutorial responsibility. Again, it's not comprehensive educational programming, but it is educational service. That's something that we haven't built in-house yet for students who are at that level of support or receiving that type of support right now. I'm working with virtual providers for the most part, but that's also not successful for some of our students with this type of need. It's hard for them to access consistently and perform without direct support of another adult there with them. So if the problem persists, that may be something, an additional position or cost that we would need to look at incurring more directly locally.
If we didn't have Anchor and Rise, would we be having a much bigger problem throughout all the grades?
For sure.
Considerably so, yeah.
For sure. They're doing amazing work with our kids. A lot of them. Amazing.
So for the anticipated I'm not gonna go into any of the details. I gave you some highlights. If anybody has any questions about those, ask, but we can sort of talk about what the changes are for the budget. And not a lot of changes. With respect to staffing, we do have, 2 positions that, we were hoping to contract with UVM for a couple of students. And, as you said, Jim, only one of them was filled, one of them wasn't, so we filled it with somebody in-house. And we'd like to fill both of those positions with staff members in-house next year. So that's the intention. Those positions are in the budget. It's not an increased cost because they were contracted costs in the budget before. So it's just a change of how we will fill those positions. There are 2 new RISE paraeducator support positions included in the budget, and that is to support the expansion of the RISE program that Caitlin mentioned. We wanted to start that this year, but we weren't able to fill the special educator position. So next year, the plan is to have 2 more RISE paras in place, and there likely will be other shifts in positions within the schools, perhaps of support staff, but we can't know right now what that would look like. So for now, it's 2 positions added to the budget, and there may be some shift of other paraeducators in other buildings that those positions themselves may shift. And a slight change to.
Just since you brought up the paras,
Yeah.
we had made an intentional shift away from as much use of paras and more to, fully qualified special educators. We're still on that track, right?
Philosophically, very much so. The challenge, though, is that when your special educator caseloads are getting larger and larger, there's a greater chance that you're going to need additional paraprofessional support to help some of those students access other settings when they're not working directly with that special educator. So absolutely moving in the direction of more professional support and more skill instruction as opposed to more support for access. That's what we continue to push for. But again, that's something that our inability to fill all of our professional positions is trickling down to an impact for the student experience.
Are we developing a longer-term solution? Right now, it seems like we're reacting to what's on the ground with increased high school needs for social and emotional assistance. When people don't get hired because they don't apply, have we got a longer term, when the federal government in its infinite wisdom decides to enforce every subtlety of the American Disabilities Act, we're going to have to do something that provides more certifiable educational compliance, partly. So what's our long-term plan?
That is work that I am deeply entrenched in right now. To Randy's point, the BOCES bill is something that will give us potentially greater latitude in developing that within our BRSU system. In the absence of that, though, what I'm doing is working with some of our local independent partners to address what could be developed within their continuum of service provision so that they'd be able to accept students with profiles which right now they're not equipped to effectively serve. I'm trying to build in partnership with some of our local independent schools because we can't build anything that's directly within our control at the moment at that secondary level.
So I would also just say that 2 other points I think are important. One is I've asked Caitlin to develop a strategic plan long-term, looking at special ed programming, where we want to be in 3 to 5 years, and that's K-12. And the second, we had that conversation a few months ago. The second is that if our system does move to being more organizationally efficient, that provides a lot more opportunity for us to be compliant with special ed programming. We have much greater flexibility if we are more efficient as a system. So as I've been speaking with Caitlin over the last few months about, trying to think big picture I think about the SU, but really the focus has been Taconic and Green. Without hesitation, she said, a more consolidated model benefits special ed programming. And so I think in the light of that question, I'm going to just say that because I think it's relevant.
With respect to the budget, right now, obviously, we're planning for how to best serve the students that are there now and what we have now. So you're not seeing any of that level of planning into next year's budget.
Right, and it's challenging, I think, from a budgetary perspective, right? We find ourselves knowing the positions we need and that we want in the budget, having multiple years of not being able to fill them, trying not to over budget, but also be budgeted to the,
Point that we need
to the point that we need to. So just, I want to be super transparent with the board that we are doing the best we can, given a landscape that we haven't experienced before. And I wish we weren't continuing to have surpluses, because I want us to be filling the positions in order to provide the best services we can for our kids. So I guess I'm just, again, claiming a moment to just say, we have spent a tremendous amount of time, the three of us, and with our LEAs, trying to figure out how do we approach this from a budgetary perspective. You see that we're bringing you something where we're saying, hey, let's give some of this surplus back to districts right now to help. We haven't done that before. And we're hedging our bets based on what we've seen over the last couple of years and making that decision. So, that's our thought process and decision-making around where we are with what we proposed to you tonight.
And as you've seen, you've heard me talk about this at T&G, and what I wrote up a little bit about is that when we are budgeting for these unfilled positions, and we know we are going to have staffing changes, we are really budgeting on the low side. And it is highly likely that if we filled all those positions, we will be under budget, because it's just our experience is that if we can't fill them all, we're trying to, how do I budget for a full-time FTE? But if we don't fill it, then I've got that whole position that we're over budget. So we're trying to capture maybe a little bit of those costs and budgeting a little less. And you see a little bit of that even in anticipated, where I pointed out a couple places where there are either benefit election changes or new staff have moved in that might cost a little more. And you see that the staffing costs are increased just a little bit because of those changes. And so that's to be expected because of how we're approaching the budget now. It's very different than what we did, 5-7 years ago, where we were always in the opposite direction, or we were at least taking a middle road, a 2-person medical plan, that kind of thing. We're not doing that anymore. Try to be a little more protective of that large surplus that we don't really want to land with.
One thing that is kind of curious in general, when we had, Act 173 and redo special ed and all the studies at the state level and all, there seemed to be a suggestion that there was a over-identification of students for special ed and all. I'm seeing our special ed numbers, although, maybe dropping in the fiscal 26 numbers that you have here, but you had increasing numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And is that because that theory never really held much water, at least not with respect to our district, or is it?
Before you jump in, Caitlin, I'm just going to say one thing. Remember that when COVID hit, we had a sharp drop, and so we were slowly going back up. Okay. Now we're in, so I think that when we were looking at 23, 24, we were back at a more level playing field, and then I know you have stuff to add on this.
That's a good.
But now there's more to the story.
Yeah, I think there's probably many factors, but the two most prominent that I think of that are contributing to our continually increasing numbers are that we're still seeing the change effects of 173 implementation. So there's been a tremendous amount of work that's happened in the last 2 years related to more intensive tier 2 intervention is what we would call it. So prior to students being identified as being eligible for special education, a lot more intensive support at that kind of moderate level of intervention. Additionally, there's been a change at the state level in the way in which we identify students with specific learning disabilities. The definition of that has become much more broad in many ways and requires us to be reliant on the data from those early interventions that I was just referring to. Because our system is still in the process of fully getting to implementation on those, we sometimes still have data that would tell us the student needs more than what we're able to provide at the intervention level right now, because we're still building those robust systems at level 2. So that is absolutely a component of it. And then secondary to that, I also think we're starting to already see the benefits that our students are reaping from having consistent tier 1 curriculum implementation in ELA and in math, but we're still only a couple of years into that process. So the further we get down that road of full implementation, we will be assured that our students are getting that really sound evidence-based tier 1 instruction, and that we're not seeing students with profiles that are actually a result of instructionally created skill gaps versus like organic learning disabilities. So part of the fact that I think our numbers are continuing to increase right now is that we're still solidifying those two systems, or doing work in those two kind of domains of our system. And as that work gets stronger, we should over time theoretically see a reduction in the percentages with which we're identifying students. We're not there yet though, because we're still building that plane as we're flying it.
The other thing I'll add, when you look at the drop, say from FY25 anticipated to FY26, keep in mind that these are numbers of what I know, what I'm
Really
using to
identified.
build the budget. Right, so FY26 is just that. It's who's here right now in FY25 graduating and incoming pre-K, incoming pre-K and kindergarten, right? Like, so it's not where we actually expect the number to be next year, because there may be more kids coming in, more kids identified, that kind of thing. It's just what we're building the budget on. It's what we know today.
So does that mean the special ed budget is particularly volatile throughout the year?
Always. Always, always, always. I mean, when you think about the secondary program alone, we pay for every single student, right? So as students move in, as students are identified, as student services change, the cost for that individual student changes constantly. It's constantly in flux. So we do the best that we can, and this is a snapshot as of today, right, or last week, what we knew then, but it will change, without a doubt.
I had another question, which is, for the paraprofessionals for the RISE program, is there a different pay rate that makes it more enticing, that are more likely you're going to get people?
Yeah, there is, both for the RISE program and for staff working in our anchor program, there is a higher rate of pay, which is commensurate with the specialized training that they receive to be able to be effective in those positions. So it's not just strictly the fact that they're working within those programs. It reflects the fact that they've got that kind of more specialized skill that we've developed through internal trainings with them.
We ready?
One other, just one, for a while, we've had a situation with, in secondary, you said the rates we get charged change all the time and all. And we've kind of had an issue with not quite a level playing field of how those charges get calculated. Is that's still where it's always been?
It is.
Thank you. So it's still a problem to
Yes.
get to.
Yep. Yeah. There's not support for us in determining what those costs are from the state.
Because I know from discussions with, at least one person in a district similar to ours, north of here, that they've got the same issue in a big way. I was just thinking of, a few of us getting together who were in the same position might be fruitful.
How do we initiate that?
Oh, I can help.
I
I,
mean,
lots of
if cooperation is useful and multiple districts are encountering the same problem, and the solution is to consolidate services, it seems to me that that's a net win for everybody.
Well, here it's not really so much consolidating services as getting the legislature to recognize
Yes.
that independent schools and how they charge for special ed should be more on par with
It's
what
the
public schools
AOE.
do.
It's the AOE.
It's
coming
in
out.
statute, and it's not, AOE is not in compliance right now.
Right.
So,
It's been in statute for a couple of years
that's where I've been in touch a lot with, we've actually given a hand somewhat through VSBA with somebody else on the board who ties into St. Johnsbury. And so discussed a lot more, and St. Johnsbury's talking to them a lot more, but these are the kind of issues that come up and we're each grumbling about, and it's like, we should grumble together, you know?
And it's, I mean, in the absence of we providing guidance for what reasonable rates are for all these different services, that leaves us with the local responsibility of negotiating those independent contracts with all of our assorted independent school partners, which obviously we have a lot because of our choice structure and our geography. But on an annual basis, we're haggling around what are reasonable costs comparable to what our costs are in district and kind of in parity with the services that we would be providing, but with no backbone of guidance from the AOE, we often hit impasse at rates that are higher than what we pay internally for comparable services. And we don't have any ability to influence beyond a certain point.
Can we advocate for a more effective and efficient system, which isn't that part of the mandate of the long-term lowering of costs with improved efficiency? And shouldn't we be phrasing commentary to that august committee in the short run and long run about delivering services much more efficiently, which might end up being more less costly?
Like efficiency of service delivery within our locations. I think it's a very real consideration as folks are embarking on.
When we get the legislators here, maybe we can bring that one up.
And is this an Act 173 or a Rolls 2200 or?
173.
22,
But it's in
parity.
173.
Parity's
Parity's
in
in
173,
173.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just something else to do.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Keep working on.
Very
So-
conscious of time,
Yes.
so I don't know
Yeah.
what we want to,
I wanted to point out one more thing if I
Yeah,
could.
please.
On the assessments page, so what you see on the assessments page is, which I'm trying to find my packet page. I feel like I didn't print it. There it is, packet page 33. We've used, now typically when we do the special education assessment, we take the current year ADM, we project it out a year. We do that because a lot of these costs are based on what our expectation is for where a student is going to get educated next year. So it really does impact the cost. It's very different than using the current year ADM for the general budget. So we take the current year ADM, we project it out another year. And so these numbers are based on what we believe our ADM is. We don't have numbers from the state yet, so I do expect our final assessment to be a little different because we're not quite there yet with state numbers. But this should be fairly close. And I do want to point out Meadowy seeing a higher increase than the other districts, and that is mainly due to the change in early education, special education delivery. So previously, Meadowy has currently a pre-K teacher that also provides special education services. She's dual endorsed, and that's the way that classroom has been run. Due to a change in staff due to resignation, we expect to hire a pre-K classroom teacher solely, not dual endorsed, not providing special ed services. So that's already taken care of in the Meadowy budget. We've talked about it at Meadowy, but it does impact the special ed assessment because those services are now going to be provided through staff in the special education budget, okay?
And this, the net result of this is, the total assessment in the district's up 157,000.
Yes,
But
no
talking about returning for over 400,000 to
This
the
year.
districts.
Yes.
So net, since all the budgets first draft was with a flat special ed, they're gonna see a benefit when they look at the next.
They'll see a benefit, but remember, we are talking about 2 different years. So,
Right,
with
right,
that
right.
400 that's coming back is gonna come back to you now.
Right.
And then this is gonna be the budget for next year.
Okay, yep. Okay, any other questions? The special ed budget? Are we ready to approve this budget?
I move we approve as written, the special ed budget as written.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, whoop, Alex got his hand up there first. We'll give Alex a second. Okay, no further discussion, then all in favor of approving the special ed budget as presented, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
And aye, Dean, thank you. Okay,
Unanimous.
that's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We're on to the general
Do
budget.
we need to, oh yeah, okay.
What's up?
That was what I was gonna ask next, if we need to.
Yeah,
do
we
general
need to
budget.
go back,
Yep.
but I didn't see much change.
No, not a lot of changes in the BRSU general budget. We have added a couple of items. So there's an increase to anticipated costs this year for potential legal expenses and again for next year, as well as an increase to professional development for next year. So it's an increase of 50,000 in both anticipated and in budget. And because of that increase in anticipated, I have lowered the use of surplus to the assessments. So in the last draft, you saw 200,000 to reduce assessments. In this draft, you're seeing 150. And that is it for the changes, other than, those little minor tweaks I do here and there for election changes by staff, but nothing material changed there. Those are the material changes.
I thought it was a pretty good budget the last time. Sounds like you've massaged it a little.
Just a little.
So I would move the approval of the general budget.
Okay, do we have a second? David,
Second.
David got it, beat you to it, Dave. Actually, I had one more question, just line 79, professional development.
Yep.
Service.
Yep.
What was that?
Yeah, so we're anticipating, we just want to make sure that we've got money budgeted for SUPD as we look ahead to system-wide training that we might need as we are looking to meet the needs of our kids and curriculum implementation
Okay.
and project-based stuff, like just want to have, we didn't
It's
feel like
not
we
a,
had
not a
quite
big
enough.
number, I just
No,
noticed that.
We didn't feel like we had quite enough in there, after having some internal conversations about what's coming, so we decided let's just put it in because we didn't want to not be able to do what we wanted.
Most professional development is in the local district budget, so this would be something that would be SU-wide.
Right, for everybody.
How does that work? We have a lot of employees at the SU who work for the districts.
They have
But they
professional
get
development
PDs,
too,
though.
right? Like there is professional development in the budget for every position.
Yeah.
But this would be professional development for
For
staff out
staff,
to
yeah.
schools, teachers,
For
support staff,
everyone.
principals,
Okay.
right? Like everybody, yeah, exactly.
I have a
Any
question.
other questions? Yeah.
Do we have, in this new iteration of the budget, I couldn't check, do we have a better understanding of the secondary school costs?
No,
So you're still projecting BBA's rate?
Oh, you're talking about like a BBA tuition rate?
Yeah.
So that would be for TNJ.
Yeah.
Yeah, and no, we don't have that yet.
Oh, that would be
Yeah.
for
their
TNC.
meeting is tonight, my understanding, so
meeting,
we're
yeah.
hoping to have the information this week.
Yeah, so that'll be in your
They'll
next
have-
draft for TNJ,
Right.
right?
Okay, thank you.
And I did hear that St. Johnsbury came up with St. Johnsbury was much more transparent. They actually had a meeting with some of their school districts about how they budget, but then they put in a really big increase. So we'll be
Well, we'll
transparent,
see.
but fingers crossed for our secondary tuition levels. Okay, so any other questions on the general budget? No? Okay, all in favor of approving the BRSU general budget as in this iteration as presented, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay. And Dean, thank you for your aye. Okay, so that's unanimous.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, next item, VSBA and legislative updates. They're actually today, the commission for the future of public education was supposedly coming out with, I heard last week that since the 15th, when it was due, was a Sunday, they were planning on releasing it today. I have not seen it yet.
They had
I
meetings
heard-
today.
City's not over.
I heard that it was going to be somewhat different than the draft that, we had sent around the draft, plus a summary of, some of the points there. It was going to be different. One of the most interesting little tidbits that I picked up was that apparently the acting Secretary of Education ended up deciding that she couldn't sign off on it. She was concerned, or apparently concerned about the charge of the commission was to come up with recommendations for the legislature. What they came up with was a bunch of ideas to kick around. And so that became a bit of an issue, that they weren't actually meeting what they were told to do. I think that's what Zoe Saunders took some exception to. I'm not sure, I still found it useful to understand where their heads were, but, so as more details come out, I guess we'll pass those along, but I don't have any great additional info at this point.
We had a regional superintendent meeting with local legislators. There were quite a few people on the call. This was on Friday afternoon, about 15 senators and representatives from the area. So there's a lot of discussion on, about the upcoming session and education related topics. So we, we'll continue to stay in touch, both here locally meeting with legislators throughout the session and regional superintendents for the greater Southwest region. And I think we already know this, but I would say, I'm sure Jim is feeling the pressure this legislative session. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount focused on education, funding, guidance. It's going to be an interesting session. So stay in tune to it as you can. I think we're going to all find ourselves in some interesting, with a lot of interesting information to consider.
Yeah, I think in this session, or this, as we go into the legislative session, it's going to make a lot of sense to really, the VSBA sends a Tuesday email out update. It's going to definitely be worth reading those, because we have good people on the ground. There's, Sandra Cameron, who's been legislative, following legislation. And there's also the newest, a new addition within the last year, David Englander, who's an attorney who joined the staff, and he's also, looking at a bunch of these legislative issues. And the VSBA actually provides those updates for, the VSA and others kick in, FASBO and all kick in, and the VSBA actually does the work to stay on top of what's happening legislatively. So you're getting the benefit of seeing that as it comes out. So they'll be starting to feed us that information. And this is a session where we do have to stay on top of and figure out when we want to step in and give our 2 cents. I think we found in the past that our potentially, sending in a letter, a memo, something like that can be useful, but also, when we agree as to what's in our best interest, for us to then go out individually to our legislators and really make sure that all of our local legislators understand where we are is really helpful in the process. It actually does make a difference. So just kind of warn everybody that, we do, I'll try to provide some of that info, but we're all gonna be a little, clearly we're the big topic in the room now, so we're gonna want to be sticking with it. Okay.
Public comment
Reflective norms, I think we're
on target.
hopefully, unless anybody screams. Public comment? Any questions, comments? Thoughts? We don't, okay. For the next item?
I move to go into executive session for confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the body per 1 VSA paragraph 313A1F, and invite into the executive session, I believe it's our attorney, Herb Ogden, and
The superintendent.
the superintendent.
And our
Yes,
Marilyn.
Did you-
Is it
did you
Marilyn?
Yes,
say
sir, he
Marilyn,
said the attorney, Maryland, the
I,
attorney,
Oh, okay,
mentioned. Okay, is there a second on that?
second.
David, thank you. So Dick and then David. All in favor, please signify.
Aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Aye, 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 aye.
Thanks. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
And Caitlin, great job.
Yep.
see,
What?